I think with further ado, I would like to just formulate.
Part of the tribe. Some of us are lifers, some of us pass through. You're looking at a lifer. It's a well worthwhile organisation. And if you do anything to mark this for me, it would be keep those chats going. You are the powerhouses of our education system. Stand up and acknowledge it. Teachers are too shy and too modest most of the time about the fantastic things that they do. So get up and shout it out, folks. And thanks again to the executive.
Thank you very much, Pat, Elizabeth, Deirdre. What a wonderful keynote speech, and such passion and desire to drive on innovation and creativity and digital educational practice across the country. And a huge thanks once again to Adrienne. We are running a little bit over schedule. However, as a Mayo man, I can tell you all in the west of Ireland, we are not running a little bit over schedule. Don't worry about it. If you can get your kids in from yard 5-10 minutes over time, it's fine. It's fine. Okay, so we're going to carry on as is. We're going to ask the chairs and the presenters, just keep things as tight to time as you can. There is one update to the timetable. Due to unforeseen circumstances, Dr. Dahi O'Muraku is unable to attend today. He sends his thanks, his regards and his birthday wishes, and he will be replaced instead by our very own Kate Malloy, which is fantastic. Okay, so let's get going, everybody. Thank you.
Sitting comfortably. Thank you. Given that we are running behind time, I actually won't take time to introduce people. I let them do it themselves so that we perhaps pull back the few minutes. Really looking forward to hearing the great work that I know has been going on in this area. So,
well, thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Excuse the short intro.
Can I just double check? Can people hear me down the back? Perfect. Like all primary school teachers, I don't like standing in one place at any one time. So being behind a pedestal is not the place for me. So thank you very much. And thank you. So I'm a member of a team in DCU Institute of Education, or what was this year's theme, which is all about superpowered. I'll explain that as I'm going. But as I go through the slides, every now and again there'll be a QR code which brings you to that same document. The physical version I have here, and anyone involved in the project itself will get a physical copy in addition to digital. So I suppose, conscious of timing, and thank you, Elizabeth, for introducing, what I'm going to do is manage a speed round version of this. So I have three things that I really want to talk to you about. Firstly, I want to really set the tone and the context for what is the first LEGO League. It's something we hear about, it's something that is out there in the ether, but just to dispel any misconceptions, but also set the tone for what it is. Then explain about the teacher guide, the piece that I'm really interested in talking to you about. And again, QR code is up there on screen. And then I want to finish off by talking about the research that's ongoing in relation to this project as well. So without any further ado, really, first LEGO League. So this is an international educational experience, I suppose. It's not a competition, as some people sometimes believe. Instead, it is an ongoing project where children are engaging with real-life problems and working through in order to come up with their own, I suppose, their own ways of dealing with these problems and looking for solutions by engaging with an engineering design process and working with the content knowledge, but also coding, computational thinking, maker spaces, and all of the good stuff that I know everyone in CESI is so keen to forward. There are three different levels or three different categories or leagues within the first LEGO League. The one that I'm really interested in is the guy here in the middle. But briefly, first LEGO League Discover is aimed at juniors and senior infants. If I'm thinking about primary school, it can also go younger than that. Explore is aimed, broadly speaking, at 1st to 5th into 6th. And then we have Challenge, which is from 6th up to TY, whereas you have some schools that might go a little bit further on with that. With the first LEGO League, the project that I'm involved in is part of the international, but within the UK and Ireland, the main sponsor and the main partner is a group called the Institute of Engineering and Technology, the IET. Learnit, our colleagues, and some of you will know Learnit, and Ross and Niamh have worked very closely with us for this, and we couldn't have done it without them. They are the delivery partners within Ireland, and the project is funded by Science Foundation Ireland and the IET. And that's where DCU Institute of Education come in. We are the education partner for the first LEGO League in Ireland. Up on screen to the left, like Deirdre, I really like a picture. I think it tells 1,000 words, or it paints a picture of 1,000 words, but also it lets us read into things that maybe we couldn't get across in the time that we have. There's lots of different stats there, but there are two that I think are really important. One of these is that for last year's project, so last year's league was to do with a project called Cargo Connect, and I'll talk about that in a moment. The schools that were involved in the project, the kids there were involved in almost 80,000 hours of STEM education, which is mind-boggling when you think about it. And if I look at Explore, which is the primary level, it's just shy of 56,000 hours of STEM education. If I look then at the amount of teams that were participating, we had just over, or close to 7.5 or 750. Of those, almost 550 were Explore, so those 1st to 5th, 6th class ages. So it's quite a well-established project, but it's one where there's always room and opportunities for growth. And I would say to all the primary school teachers out there that are interested and are tuning into this, this is something to really get involved with. And we'll have the hook and the sell as we keep going. What I really like, and this is where, as a primary school teacher myself, by background, worked in the PDST and I'm now working in teacher education, for me what I really like is the way that it's linked to themes and categories, and I love the idea of integrated teaching and thematic planning. With the first LEGO League, there's a different theme every year. So up on screen is one from a few years ago called Boomtown Build, where we were talking about building sustainable cities, thinking about where we live, thinking about transport networks. If only the government had looked at this, we'd have been avoiding some of the housing crisis that we're working with at the moment. I know in my own locality, which was a newly built maybe 5 or 10 years ago, we're still dealing with the infrastructure problems that hadn't been considered. Whereas the primary school kids that involved with this project had solved these problems years ago. Another theme that came up was Aqua Adventure, where we were thinking about water and I suppose really looking at having clean sources of water. I don't need to talk to anyone here about the importance of that theme and how it is still quite relevant even within the state of affairs that we're at. One that I really loved was Mission Moon, where we were looking at what do we need to live on the moon? And really, while it was focused on the moon, it got us to look in a different context at what do we need in our local environments and communities in order to survive. So looking at agriculture, thinking about the food and supplies that we need, thinking again about clean water. The one last year, and again, this is one of those where it's a consequence of COVID-19 that we do not dare mention. So this is the first within the 3-year cycle of our project. So the book that I have in hand and the book up on screen is the first teacher guide. The Cargo Connect project was based around the idea of logistics and looking at how do we get the things we need from one place to another across the world. And we were looking at things like in the supermarkets at the moment, as someone who ends up putting peppers in everything that I eat and tomatoes, it's crazy. There are no peppers or tomatoes to be found around the place. And that's coming down to both logistics, but also down to climate change. But thinking about, could we look at what we're bringing from one place to another and do this in a more environmentally conscious and sustainable way? So some of the projects that were looked at by some of the kids were thinking about how the Amazon parcels that they delivered over COVID, how could they have been delivered more sustainably? What about that last mile solutions? And looking at all the robotics that people built and thought about for that. It was mind-boggling the things that they came up with, and it was fantastic to see those critical thinking. What's really interesting with this, I suppose, and up on screen I have the Sustainable Development Goals coming from the UN. Again, linking back, Deirdre talked a lot about the linkage of policy and practice and where everything is coming into alignment. If I thought about the Aqua Adventure, I'm thinking about clean water. If I'm thinking about Boomtown Build, I'm thinking about sustainable cities. If I'm thinking about Mission Moon, I'm thinking about life on land, but also climate action and life below water. Cargo Connect, I'm thinking about sustainability. This year, we are looking at renewable energy. And that's the big focus. And again, almost presaging the issues that we've had with energy prices and crisis going on at the moment. The focus this year is superpowered, which in itself is a word that has many meanings, coming back to Minsky and his suitcase terms. There's a lovely concept cartoon here that I invite you, have just a look through this for yourself, and I'll explain it slightly different than afterwards. So, in a nutshell, we're thinking about energy. Where does it come from? How do we store it? How do we move it around? And how do we use it? So thinking about those journeys of energy, which is quite a complex thing. It's something that it took, I know the team, ourselves, when we were looking at this, we really had to go back to the drawing board a few times to think, how do we put this in a context that's understandable for kids, but also for the teachers, for the principals, for all the parents who are involved with these as well. Now, this is the focus of this year's teacher guide, and this is where I want to bring you to the actual teacher guide itself. For anyone who's come in the last few minutes or who wasn't quick enough with their QR code readers, my QR code is on screen and I'll have it a few different times as I go. Underpinning everything that we were doing here is the engineering design process. So thinking about a problem, exploring potential solutions, creating prototypes and approaches to solving this problem, testing it, going back again and reiterating and retesting. And a big bit that is sometimes forgotten is the sharing of these, getting the chance to reflect, the metacognition as well going on. So this is what was underpinning what we were doing. And we saw great synergies here with what a lot of primary schools are very familiar with, and the teachers, the inquiry-based approach coming from Roberts. So thinking about the need to know, using the resources in order to try and solve this, make sense of it, and then reflect on our learning. So all of the lessons through the teacher guide are underpinned by this type of approach, a pedagogical approach that we're quite familiar with in primary school. Now, again, trying to bring as much help as we possibly can to bear, we wanted to make as many realistic and relevant connections to the curriculum as we could. So in the teacher guide, and again, this is where going from year 1 to year 2, there's about a ½ inch of thickness extra coming in here, where we were looking at how do we iterate and improve upon the first one. So within the lessons, these are the curriculum connections that are being made across the series. What we also wanted to do was try to make the policy connections. And these were really easy to do because of all the work that's been done by the people in this room who have been involved in other meetings and other focus groups and being consulted upon. We wanted to make really clear connections to the primary language curriculum, but also the primary curriculum. Thinking about policy with the digital learning framework and looking at our schools. There's a whole section in there about getting a school started with their digital learning plan if they hadn't done so already, or thinking about what focuses they could take. We also wanted to link to the new curriculum framework. Again, this is taken from the printed book which came out in September, so I've got the draft primary curriculum up there, but they have ever so slightly changed the graphic. The same ideas are at play. This was so that we could present an integrated model or a solution that a school is looking at. What does this new curriculum look like? How do I develop these key competencies that are interlinked? Here's an example that you could take and iterate and build upon. You're not going to take it and use it necessarily without making any changes, because as teachers we always adapt to our class. The other part of this was looking at things like the STEM education, policy, sustainable development, and also looking at the idea and the place of coding within the Irish primary school curriculum. So at this stage, we've brought it as close to curriculum links, policy and links with that. Really, we wanted to make sure that we were as forward-focused as possible. Part of the joy with the themes is that even though a theme might happen in a year, or they call them a season, so this year's season is focused on superpowered, like Ashter or like any thematic planning, you can always reuse this when you would like. So the idea being that a school would be able to forward plan with this. And we've touched across and developed links with all of the key competencies of the primary school curriculum framework, and that is very intentional to try and make this as helpful as possible to schools. Now, to do that, there are 14 lessons, and I suppose this is kind of an overview just to think about how this is structured. Lessons 1 to 8 in this, and I'll look through bit by bit. We're talking about context and knowledge. When we came to the next lessons 9 and 10, it was the design of the team model. So this was where they really got to take their own agency as groups. The teams were designing their solution to the problem that they identified. If I take last year, where we had a number of schools involved in the pilot of this, every single child and every single group, they had different solutions. You didn't have 8 of the same robot, we'll say, or 8 of the same design solution. You had 8 different groups who had different problems identified and solutions. Really important here is, once we've created this, thinking about how we share what we have learned and how we represent our knowledge and our understandings. So this is where it was coming to the team poster, where it's followed up then with the presentation of this, but also the reflection, because they've gone on a journey, and give them a chance to reflect on this and to develop this. Something that I suppose, I'm conscious of the way Deirdre phrased it as well, of thinking about the why rather than the what, but sometimes pragmatically we need to think about the what as well. So many of you will probably be familiar with Milo. So this is the Lego We Do kit. There'll be people in the audience, and I can almost hear Deirdre screaming in my ear, I miss the Mindstorm. The Mindstorm came before this, but like many pieces of technology, it was retired or superseded. So we're at a stage where, and I've got this very luminous line in the middle to I suppose, represent, Milo is on the way out. They're bringing him to France. He'll be gone eventually. But there's still many of those kits in schools. On the right is the Spike Essentials kit, which is the replacement to the Milo, the Lego We Do. The teacher guide that we have developed last year, this year, these two are, I suppose, compatible with both kits. So irrespective of which the school has, it will work perfectly with it. And that's where we've made as much effort as we can to support the teachers with the type of equipment that they have. So if you're tuning out and saying, I have the old kit, please do keep going because this is very relevant with it. So to give you, what I'd like to do is almost a run through of where the lessons are at. And I'm not going to go into massive depth because many of you have the guide in front of you, and if anyone would like to, I'm at page 40 if you want to skim down and have a bit of a read with me. So the lessons are divided out. As I said, the first 8 are thinking about the context. So we wanted to explain what energy journeys are. What I'll highlight as well is all of the lessons are 1 hour. One of the pieces of feedback we got from the teachers the first time around with the Cargo Connect was that these were fantastic, but I found myself almost wanting to have an hour and a half to really get to the bones of everything. So where we have more lessons, they are tightly to 1 hour with extension and, I suppose, extra lessons if you wanted to go further with a topic. Again, everyone will know their class sometimes will bite on something and not as much with another. So thinking about energy journeys, looking at the differences between non-renewable energy sources and renewable, which is something that even many adults have an issue with. Thinking about all of these electric cars that we have, but what is the energy source powering them? Is it a lot better for the environment for me to use an electric car if the energy is still coming from fossil fuels being burnt ultimately? Looking then at wind and wind energy. How do those wind turbines that we see out there, how do they work? How do they create electricity or electrical energy? How is that sourced? Thinking about how they work. Once we have done that, how do we store the energy to transport it? And how is it put into use with lesson 6? As we moved on, and again, alongside this, I should say, they are building and developing their coding and computational thinking, thinking about motorizing and thinking about energy consumption. Again, specific builds going alongside this so that the children are getting familiar with the process of designing and building and iterating and reiterating, and in order to debug their code, which ultimately is the biggest challenge that some of them will face. Coming then to lessons 9 and 10, where we're giving a lot more time and leading into the posters and the sharing. So in a nutshell, that's what the teacher guide looks like. Looking at a lesson, just clicking through, this isn't intended to kill you with PowerPoint. Again, coming from a teaching background and coming from working with teachers the whole way through my career, I like things laid out so that I know exactly what is expected in something. So in the teacher guide, it is lay flat, ring binder, setting out what are my learning outcomes to help us with planning, what type of resources do I need, where am I along the journey or the continuum of this project, and how is this linking to the other things I'm doing. Lots of colourful images, digital resources, and that QR code will work if anyone fancies having a look, but also the resources I need at a given time. So this is designed by teachers for teachers. I have 5 minutes. Speed round gets speedier. Okay. Look at another lesson. What I really want to highlight here is the supports for teachers, because again, I always think of, and if she's watching on the live stream, my poor mother always ends up getting the chills up her back when I think she's someone as a teacher who says, that all sounds really good and I like the idea, but I couldn't do that in my own class. So this is where I think of her and I go, right, this is where we're dividing it down, breaking it into the logical steps with support from images to guide and support as needed, helping with the coding and debugging, but more importantly, looking at what type of questions do I ask the kids? Because I may not feel like I have the understanding to ask the probing questions, but this is to support with that. So again, we have teachers who have never looked at a project like this that have been involved with the project and have loved it. And that's what I suppose I want to talk about last as I come into my last 3 minutes. The third and final piece of this is the research project. Again, thinking about what Deirdre had said about her Celtic knot and how everything interlinks. We've had 2 years and we're in the process of our second year. So in year 1, we had 3 schools and 2 teachers in each school, and we had a total of 40 teams that were involved in this and ultimately created projects. This year, year 2, we only have 4 schools, but we've taken on different models. So we have 12 teachers, and that was very intentional. We have 1 teacher who's continued on and brought their school, so that's a community of practice where we've got someone mentoring the other. We have an entirely new school on the same premises, pretty much, where it's 2 schools back to back, community of practice. We have a school that is on their own, so to speak, and then a school which has 6 classes involved across 2 class levels. So we want to look at the permutations of this. How could we support a project like this going forward? And you can even see here, 316 pupils and the 85 projects. We're really interested in 2 things with this. The teachers, but also the kids, the children that we are working with. This is at the heart of everything we're doing. Now, from very, very basic initial analysis of what we were doing, one of the questions we asked this year's group was, what is STEM education to you? What do you take it to mean? And I suppose two different sets of ideas coming up. The ones that I was really glad to see were they were thinking a lot about the approaches and the methodologies within STEM education. So thinking about it being really hands-on, thinking about it being integrated across different subject areas, that it wasn't, I am just doing science, I am just doing maths. How do they connect? Thinking about real-life connections as well, the real-life problems they're trying to solve. And also the development of critical thinking, that it wasn't just the problem is there and here's the answer. The children were problematizing and having to get to that. Now, there's always another side to the coin. This is where I was intrigued to see that some of them were seeing a link between the purpose of STEM is to get kids interested in STEM subjects. Another one was that the point of this is for careers, whereas I come back to what Deirdre said earlier, the point is education more broadly, not just the careers they're entering. That it was an innovative way of teaching maths and science, which again draws me to go, how are they normally teaching and what do they define as innovative? And finally, that technology was something that was part of STEM but not outside of it. So thinking back to that idea of integrated versus embed, or to be rooted in at the base of everything. Now, a quote on screen from one of the teachers from last year's project about the Cargo Connect, and I think what I really liked here was the real authentic example of integrated STEM, and another teacher coming through with the positivities, but what I really liked was the way he focused in on it's not just ticking the boxes, that it is showing how these subjects live and breathe together, particularly when we're thinking about the new linkage of science, technology, engineering, and maths as a subject area, as opposed to being separate strands. Now, in a nutshell, to finish up on time, because Elizabeth will be up shooing me off the stage, in summary, the Teacher Guide for Ireland for the First Lega League Superpowered, we've divided out into the sections on screen. If there is anyone in the room who would like to get involved with this year's season or next year's, full details are on first fll.learnit.ie, so learnit.ie are the delivery partners. What you need to take part in this would be your Lego Education Kit. So either your WeDo or your Spike Prime. You then register and you get the other parts that are needed. We are running, and I suppose the idea and the hope is that there will be a teacher guide again next year for next year's season. But this is where I say thank you so much to everyone who came, to everyone who listened, and I hope to see you all again at the 51st CESI. Fingers crossed. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, and taking it on in the rough setting here when we're having to push and try and at least keep no more lost time. I walked past the day in Drumcondra. I had to go to another meeting, but the buzz emerging from the room was just fantastic. Sorry to stop.
You're great. How long was it? Keep myself honest. I know.
Yes. So, it's really I got into this only because Jane wanted to. Otherwise, I was surprised.
Are you on your tag there?
Yeah.
Are you a wanderer, or are you likely just to stay in front of this?
Well, I don't have a separate, and it's just Prezi thing, so I have to actually click them here.
Right.
So I'll be more or less here.
Yeah, I'll stick this on you here anyway.
Yeah. Lovely. Can we do one? Yeah. Oh yeah, great. Is there a few minutes to wait for others to come in, or? No, is that it?
Just need to rock on, man, I think.
Yeah, okay, that's grand. Okay. Okay, we'll make a start because I know we're behind time, and I'll try to be as quick as possible. So I'm talking about Leaving Cert Computer Science specifically. This is a slightly edited version that we used a few years ago, an A to Z guide of Leaving Cert Computer Science. At the time, it was sort of explaining what it was and what we do, and now I suppose the focus is changing to establishing the subject, giving more information to people, and so on. So I just go through it as it is. Okay, and A, computer science is for all. Okay, it's not just a bland phrase that's out there. There's parts of the curriculum, the way we do things and the way we operate that really enforces this. So one example would be, we had some webinars with a woman called Colleen Lewis, who worked in a college in California and had great results as far as including minorities, including females in computer science. And I'll talk about a couple of the ways that they did that, like role modeling, by reassuring students that they were there to assist them, and different ways like that. So that's computer science for all. And banish anxiety. So the same thing, if we say computer science for all, we don't, like that college in America that people said, and girls said, I was thinking about going, but it's very difficult, isn't it, computer science? And they didn't try to sugarcoat it. They said, yes, it's very challenging, and that's why it's worthwhile. But they said, but we're there for you, and they spent more time teaching and tutoring than just research. So there's, so what we're encouraging people, teachers and students, is not to worry too much about what's going to happen. Nobody is an expert. There's holes in people's knowledge in computer science. Teachers, ourselves, teacher educators, students, etc. So not to worry about it. Course content then. So we have, and there's probably a couple of people here that were involved in the group. We have the specification here, and basically the course, it's recommended. It's not a linear thing, but you've got four ALTs here, applied learning tasks, and from those, so number 4, for example, is embedded systems. So typically, a school might use a microbit, and then from that, you'd have to do some programming. So abstraction would come into it, algorithms may come into it. There may be issues about computers in society. So the whole spec is feature future. It's interwoven. And so you can go off anywhere, even testing, right? An area that's very often neglected by students who are so keen on building a program or an app or something that they don't think about testing. So it encompasses that. So these 4 ALTs are a springboard to go to other parts of the course. They're also a great grounding in the coursework, which is worth 30% of their assessment. So it's what they learn from that, although the only difference is they do the ALTs in groups, and that's very much stressed, whereas in the coursework, it's their own individual work. But hopefully they would have picked up the good habits from working in a team that they can apply later on. Okay, next is D. What do you think D stands for? Quick guess? Right, is it debugging? No, design process. And okay, there's various design process, but we do, when doing the ALTs, we stress that in their teams, they investigate first. They don't just, obviously, sometimes you have to hold people back that want to just code straight away. So they investigate the problem in groups, talk about ideas, brainstorm. Then they plan, and they don't try to go on planning. Then the design, then the actual creation, so coding basically here, evaluate, and then if they want to iterate, that's okay. Now, even though the ALTs, they're relatively small tasks, it's good to see students, I think, getting used to this and saying, oh, my design process, this is how I did it, and they have it in these sections, or something similar. Or they may say, a new sort of software development methodology, Agile, they may say, no, I'm using Agile development here. Even though it could be a 3-week project as opposed to, you might be looking at a 6-month project in industry, and to determine if it's Agile or traditional or waterfall process like this. So, but it's good to see students using those terms. So the exam and coursework, this was just a sort of factual thing, and most of you probably know it. There's an examination that's 70%, and within that, there's a part of that that's coding, and another is longer questions, and then the coursework assessment is 30%, their project. The framework for the CPD works that every school is given an invitation to an expression of interest to see if they want to bring computer science into their schools. And it's quite a long application form. They have to give a lot of information, but it's really to get them thinking. We don't want to bar anybody, but it's to get them thinking, are we ready for this or not? And what we basically want, if they are ready for it, there's a sort of a bargain there. So there's school leadership support that when this came out, the minister was Richard Bruton, and he was quite for this. So he allowed a lot of resources like overnight CPD sessions in hotels that were all paid for, etc. And so it was there was a work there, or there was something the schools had to give, that they were getting, their teachers were receiving this CPD, but they had to agree to allow the students to go, and it could be 7, 8, 9, 10 days a year over 2 years, and then some more after that. So it was quite an undertaking. So what we have here is national workshops. They're very often residential overnights. There's about 7 of those, usually 2-day affairs over 2 years. So that's a very important part of things. There's also school clusters where teachers meet together geographically in smaller numbers, and the more experienced teachers can help the younger teachers, but they're all in together there. We have a few of those a year. And webinars, I mentioned that we get some of the top computer science educationalists like Sue Sentence, who came up with the programming methodology PRIM, which is, moved away from just, here's some the words you need to program, now program. That you have a look at a program, predict what is going to happen, run it, modify it, and then at the end of that, you make the program instead of just having to dive straight into it. It's proved to be very effective, and there's other ones as well. So we try to get people like that in the webinars. We allowed the PDST was traditionally supposed to be there's professional development, not training, professional development. But in this case, because so many teachers were out of field, that we were allowed to use skilled workshops and things like Python, HTML, and so on. Okay, and just developing that again about the growth mindset, and we've had a lot of our CPD is sort of based on this, and this idea of the teacher isn't the sage on the stage, they're working with the pupils as opposed to dictating to them. So the the fixed and growth mindset. The growth mindset is embracing challenges, obstacles, being inspired from the success of others, effort, that idea of failing and failing better, and so on, as opposed to the fixed mindset that certain people are not good at computers, they'll never get it, that's it. There's only a few people, a few percentage of the population can do this. So the growth mindset challenges those sort of ideas. This was just a factual thing that there's higher and ordinary level, although in the ALTs, in the applied learning tasks, there's students will be in together and they work together, and that's the core of what happens in the computer science classroom. Information technology, digital literacy, and computer science. Just explaining the difference between them and the overlap. And part of what we're doing now is giving more information to schools, to teachers, to students about what is computer science. And if we get somebody coming back and saying, I'm glad you told me that, I'm not interested in that anymore, that's great, because they've saved themselves time and money. Some people may think it's like a ECDL plus, and it's not. It's looking at problems and designing solutions and bringing in coding and so on. So once they have an idea of what it is, it either inspires them to want to do it more or maybe puts them off, which is fine. So the two languages, and neither of these languages are mentioned in the spec really, but Python has sort of taken over as the language of the course, and the practical programming part of the written paper for the Leaving Cert is done in Python. Okay, and the key skills, so linking with the key skills at Leaving Cert level, again, these may seem theoretical, but if you consider the ALTs, the learning tasks, communication there is important, working with others is very important, critical and creative thinking, when they're brainstorming, coming up with ideas, and information processing. The current coursework is about modeling, so they may have a situation where they've got a vast amount of data and they have to pick out what's important and what they should use. And then being personally effective would link with that as well in doing the coursework, because, as I said, that's individual, whereas the ALTs are done in groups. Oh, sorry. Okay, and the learning outcomes, I already sort of alluded to it, but there's the learning outcomes on one page, and this is very often computer science teachers will have this beside their desk where they will see, they'll keep a track of things. They'll do one applied learning task, and that would be a springboard to various parts of the course. Microprocessors, it was, some people thought at the start that you'd use a microbit for a while and then gradually you'd move on to Raspberry Pi. I think, especially with version 2 of microbit, it's become more popular that you can do everything you need to do with it. But I don't, Keith, what would you think about use of microprocessors or microcontrollers, and which to use?
I sold my soul to the microwave. I teach that at level 8 undergraduate, so I love microwaves.
Yeah. So it's not, I think when we've done some workshops in Raspberry Pi and we're thinking about doing something in Arduino, but we don't want to give people the impression that this is what you should be doing, that you can do everything, and I'd agree with you, you can do everything with a microbit. NCCA, okay, they developed the spec. They also have some very useful resources, especially around things like computational thinking and computers in society, some very good activities that teachers can use. Open source, that's just to say, and sometimes it's frustrating in the job that if a particular tool would be the best way to show some aspect of the course, we can't use proprietary software, we have to use open source. So PDST, and that might be the last time you see that symbol, because obviously it's changing. They're bringing together a few of the teachers' development services into an organisation called IDGA, and that's starting next academic year. Questions, it's not questions from you. These are questions that principals and teachers would have questions. Am I ready for this? Am I able to do this? Do I have the teachers? And so on. And that's why that expression of interest process is so very useful, to get schools focused in on, do we really need this? Will we have the students? Do we have the resources? And so on. And resources, the same thing. You know, it's not a very high spec, but do we have the laptops? Do we have a computer room? Do we have the teachers, or do we have a second teacher in case there's something happens to the first teacher, and so on, that they have to think about. Students, again, we try to do a lot in for transition year to let students know about, we do with the teachers, but to let students know what computer science is about, and to let teachers know what a computer science classroom looks like. And we have one interactive, I need a volunteer, that in the class, it's very often the philosophy is, we don't say, today we're going to do coding of that we do an unplugged activity, and that will lead into coding. So, do I have a volunteer? Takes 2 seconds. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, this is a game, it's called Skyscrapers, and you've got 1, 2, 3, any teachers would probably have seen this before. 1 story, 2 stories, 3 stories, 4 stories, 5 stories, right? 2 of us are trying to build our own skyscraper, right? And obviously you want to be whoever has the highest wins. But we go in turn, but if I go first, you can not only put one group, you don't take these apart, you can put one group of these, and then you can put another group as long as you're under me, or when you get to level with me or above me, then it goes back to my go. Right? Okay, so I know I'm not going to... Yeah.
So move any of them?
Yeah, that's where you're making your skyscraper, that's where I am.
Okay, so you do this one.
Okay, you're going for 5? Okay, very good. Okay, now I'm going 4 and 2. Yeah, okay, you've won. Okay. Yeah, okay. The point about this is that you can do it like that, right, where you're thinking, or you can do it just sort of repeatedly and see what pattern emerges. And that's as valid a solution, you know, a sort of a Monte Carlo type solution. That's as valid a solution as trying to be just logical all the time. And in fact, at times it's better. And in this situation, the key was to use the 3. If you use the 3, you won't lose, you know, at any time. It becomes a different game if you've got 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and so on. But the point in the classroom is that they would do that and just play with it, and then say, first of all, they could program what it takes to win, how to win, and then program a strategy that you'll win more often than somebody else. So it's like, again, takes away the sort of mystery of it, that you have to program something, that you're doing something, you see that you have done it, and you've done it well, and then to code it. Okay, so that's unplugged. And V is vocabulary, and we were saying some of the things like computational thinking and modeling that people don't have, they're not exact things to learn, and they're not supposed to, and in computational thinking, abstraction and so on, they're not supposed to be terms that tie you down, that you have to solve a problem in this way. They're supposed to help you. That abstraction is just focusing on one part of the idea of the concept. So, for example, if you're doing something with traffic lights, you're only probably, the data you're concerned about is how many cars are coming from this direction and this direction and this direction, not what's the colour of the cars and so on, right? So it's just there to give you some sort of help or license to solve problems.
Sorry to
Yeah.
just we're going to go for coffee break in 5 minutes.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, I'll be finishing too.
Then we'll do a catch-up.
Right. And the World Wide Web, again, just a very good source of information. And, you know, this idea of brain, so thinking about the problem and coming up with your own solution, have the confidence to come up with your own solution, possibly. Then you'll need help from, go to buddy, you'll be working in groups most of the time, and then boss is the teacher who's not expected to have all the answers anyway. Extra effort, so although we said that we're promoting computer science for all and anyone can do it, and in the first batch of teachers, it was 40 in the sort of pilot program, there were French teachers in there and music teachers and ones with no background in computer science. But we didn't say, oh, come on in, we'll do everything for you. We said, come on in, if you're willing to get this challenge, brilliant. But it is going to be, we didn't sugarcoat it. You would need to put in extra effort. Okay, and then that idea of the power of yet, that I can't do this yet, failing and failing better and so on. This doesn't work yet. So, you know, sticking at it, being interested in it, and even being able to explain why you couldn't overcome a challenge if you couldn't. But it's to have that idea rather than wanting to be able to solve everything in record time and so on. And that's it. The Z there is for thank you, and Cwrdd Magwyf Gilair. So we've got 1 minute if anyone has any comment, question. Tomato that they'd like to throw down if they can find them. Yeah, I think so. Okay. Right. Right. Thanks.
a few days ago.
Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our presentation. It's on digital technologies to support and engage EAL learners in the classrooms, so English as an additional language. I am Stacey Ryan. This is my colleague Owen Keegan. We're from the PDST, and over the next 25 minutes or so you can sit back and relax. We will make all our resources available to you. You don't have to try keep up with what we're doing unless you choose to do that. So enjoy. We are going to cover the following. We hope that we will get through the steps involved in supporting culturally responsive teaching in the classroom, how to address the needs of EAL learners in a linguistically diverse classroom, a range of digital tools that will hopefully help you and your students in the class. So some will be, good for you as the teacher, but we would hope that you would maybe encourage your students to use them and, make them more independent in their learning and empower them in the classroom. And then just some supports that we have available from the PDST in terms of EAL and digital technologies. So what is an EAL learner? And this, I suppose, not everyone might know the students in their class and are the EAL because they might have a good level of conversational English. But EAL learners are anyone whose home language is different to the language of schooling. So I would encourage you all to really become familiar with the students in your classroom and figure out exactly what your profile is. And then we need to think about, once we know the profile, how can we become more culturally responsive in our teaching for these students? And there's some elements that we can take on board to do this. The first one is to build relationships. So get to know the students in your class, as I've just said, and get to know their families. Get to know the language that is spoken at home. Provide a more inclusive curriculum. So think about the books that you use in certain classes, the case studies that you might use in a class, and any material that you're bringing in, is it inclusive of the students that are in front of me? We might go for our old favourites, but maybe try to mix it up and think about everyone that's in our classroom. Address our own unconscious bias. I'll leave that there, have a think about it. And set high expectations. So when it comes to EAL learners, we can very often excuse because they don't have a good level of English, but what we want to do is say to them, what we want you to achieve to the highest level possible, just as anyone else in our classroom. So bring them on that journey and give them access to the curriculum to do that. Empower the students in your class. So like I said there in the beginning, the tools that we show you today are not all for you to use as teachers. You can, of course, but it would be great if you could go and spend some time with the EAL learners in your school or in your class and show them how to use some of the tools so that they can be empowered on their own to use them. And that takes a little bit of pressure off you as a teacher as well. Give them choice as well in how they engage with certain materials, and that will further empower them and motivate them in your class. And lastly, the linguistic diversity. Think about all the different languages that are spoken in your classroom. And I know this could be crazy to say, but try to address all those languages. And we'll give you some tips today around how you could possibly do that. So really, the workshop today is focused specifically on the linguistic diversity, so language differences in your classroom and tools that we can use to support that. Commons iceberg theory is one really useful theory when we think about language in our classroom and how we can maybe support our students. So it's divided into BICS and CALP. And I'm not sure if you've heard of this before. So BICS is our basic interpersonal communicational skills. So this is the conversational language that your students have coming into the classroom. But CALP is what we really need to address, the cognitive academic language proficiency. So when it comes to BICS, students can take anything from 6 months and they might have BICS picked up. But when it comes to CALP, it can take several years. So it's not an option to leave a student out of our classroom and go and learn some English and then bring them in when they're ready, because they could miss the whole curriculum. We need to have them in the classroom from day one, working with the language support teacher. We're trying to build up their BICS and their CALP simultaneously and providing access to the curriculum as we go. So one of the tools I suppose that we're going to give you today, this is a great one developed by a colleague of ours, Narelle, on the EL team. It's a Google Sheet, so if you don't have a Google account, set up one to get access to this and make several copies of it, one for each of your classes, and provide it to the students. And what we can do is share this with each of your class and support your students to build their keywords. So as teachers, every one of you, I'm sure, work on keywords in your classroom. So this is a really nice way of working with keywords, but allowing the students to have the keywords in their own language as well. On this particular sheet here, across the top are all the different languages. So you can see you can scroll over and you can just select. So for example, we might have someone Bengali or anything like that. You select whichever languages are in your class. And you can see down along the left, we've got all the keywords from your class. So it will change into those languages. So you can enter in as many keywords as you want down along. So we'll enter a computer. And then when you go to the filtered page, you can see if you have 6 students in your class with 6 different languages, they now have your keyword in English, but each of the students has that language in their own language. So they're learning simultaneously. They're building their CALP in class. So you will have access to this at the end. We'll show you on this particular sheet now. Bring it up here for you. So we're just switching between screens now, so bear with us today. This is a PDF that we're going to give you at the very end. Up on the top corner there, you can see we have a Scan Me. That's where you'll get access to that particular sheet. So you will be asked straight away to make a copy of it. And again, you can make as many copies as you want. You will see the rest of the session then is split into written, verbal and visual communication. The idea being that even though we're at a computer science convention and we want to maybe talk about how do we address EAL students in the computer science classroom, we've it done in a way that you can address it in any classroom. So we're looking at different apps and tools that will be relative right across the curriculum and right across each classroom that you go into. I'm going to cover some written ones with you now, and then I'll be passing you over to Ole to do the verbal and the visual. In terms of written communication, we think about these students coming into our classroom with a very basic level of CALP, and then we're giving them textbooks, exam papers, handouts, digital handouts, and we're expecting them then to go off and do this homework in a language that they're just not familiar with. The ideal scenario is you give them the work in the English language, but you also allow them to get their own language alongside it. So if you were given a handout, for example, you might have English on the front of the handout and then their own language on the back of it. Or now that we're all great on Teams and Google Classroom, you might provide the digital version of the different languages up there as well. Or as I said at the beginning, empower the student and maybe show them, I'm going to give you a digital copy, you create your own copy that you need in your version as well. So whichever works for you. So I'm going to show you a couple of tools that will work with that. The first one is a website, actually. So we're going to give students research to do, maybe for CBAs or different Leaving Cert projects and things like that. And everything is in English. Quick way to get their own language is a tool called Google Translate. So I have it already loaded onto the Chrome extension bar on this. So you just need to get around that. There's lovely YouTube clips. It's very simple. You just go to the apps and download it. So we have Google Translate. Another little bar will pop up at the bottom. And you can now select whatever language, or the student you would hope you've empowered to can select whatever language. So we'll just go for French for the moment. And you can see the page has now been translated into the language that they need. So this is all in French now. You can change it to any language that you want. The student can change it to any language. And they can go between the original in English or their new language, and they can learn simultaneously. So they can now do all their research very quickly. It took 2 seconds to do in their own language and go between the English as well to build their CALP as they're going. Okay? That's a very quick one when it comes to doing research in your classroom.
Is that accurate, the Google translation?
It's fairly there. It's up and around the 90%, I think. It's pretty, like, it's not perfect. Like, there's even a Gaeilge one there. But I'd imagine if they're seeing it in their own language, they'll know what's accurate and what isn't. They'll get a good understanding at least. You know, they'll get a lot of the keywords that they need to understand. Yeah.
Mainstream languages, it tends to be good. It tends to be weaker.
Yeah.
Minority languages.
Yeah.
Such as Irish.
Looking a bit funny in French.
So in a Word document then, if you're giving them, as I said, a handout or a digital copy of questions, so this is a Leaving Cert computer science exam question. Again, it might be very difficult for a student to try and understand that if English is not their first language. So we've just copied in the text from the exam question, and you go to Tools, and you can go down to Translate the document. And you can again select any of those languages that you saw there a while ago. So if we were to pick Croatian, you'll be asked then to translate it, and this time a separate document will open. So you'll have the original in English. So as I said a moment ago, you might give them the English copy, but you're going to give them the language in their own copy as well. And they can compare word for word and learn their calc as they're going and access. What you want is them always working with the English copy, because you want to build their calc, but you want to give them a backup of a copy in their language. Okay, so that was a really quick, again, 2 seconds. They've got the whole document there in their own language. A lovely tool, I don't know, a lot of you might have heard of it already, is Immersive Reader. It's great for any students on the continuum of support, but it's also great for students with EAL. So Immersive Reader and a lot of the tools that we cover today, you can use them in Google or you can use them in Microsoft. In Microsoft, it's easy to get to. In Google, you need an extension called HelperBird. And again, this will all be on the document that we'll give you. So we open up HelperBird. A panel will come up here on the right-hand side. We highlight some of the text that we want to maybe translate or work with for the student. You have 2 buttons here. You can see you can switch it to dyslexic font for any of the students as well. So we're making everything accessible for all students in our class. We click on Immersive Reader. You'll see there, it comes up on this right-hand panel, but we can make this full screen by clicking here on the arrows. And you have a few options in Immersive Reader. The first one is very basic. We can just get it to read out to our students. Okay, we don't have the sound connected, but as it's going, it's reading word for word there, and you can pause at any time. You can switch from male to female voice, and you can slow the speed up. Another lovely thing that it does is picture. So on some of them, it's not loading today, but if you click on some of the words, it will actually bring up little images. It's just an internet issue here today. But it will bring up an image of a player or a matchstick or certain words. So it'll help, you know, if they're stuck with some words, to help build, okay, well, I actually recognize that image there, so that's what that word must mean. Up here in the top right-hand corner, we can select different color backgrounds, different fonts again, which are nice for some students. Grammar options is lovely to get the syllabus, so we'll help them with their pronunciation and to identify nouns and verbs and so on, different grammar options. If you select any of them, it will highlight them in different colors. So it's lovely, isn't it? But this particular one, I suppose if we're thinking about EAL students, we can do line by line focus, so it can take one line at a time to help really show where they are at with it. Or we can do change the whole language of the document, which is obviously what we're thinking about today in terms of linguistic diversity. So we're going to go for anything random there, Danish, and you just switch to the whole document, and we now have it all in Danish. They can hit play and they can listen to the words. And again, we're working with the English maybe handout in front of them or in a digital copy, and we have their own language as well. And each student can do this on their own. So you might have 4 or 5 students in the class, all with their own languages, learning as they go, or when they go home even, to just try absorb it for their homework and that. Okay? So there's lots there with help Immersive Reader, and as I said, it's available on both platforms. And again, I will be showing your students how to use it. If you even go into Teams, even in the chat in Teams, there's a little Immersive Reader button. So if you're putting up homework and everything, the student can change that into their own language and hear it. So anything in the chat or the channels or anything, Immersive Reader is built in. So watch out for that in any tool that you use. Okay. And the last thing that I'm going to show you before I pass you over to Owen is Google Translate again, but, oops, sorry, not that one. But it's on your phone. So this time we've the app downloaded, and for today's purpose, because we've just a short amount of time, we've just done a quick screen grab of it. So when you download this Google Translate app, on the bottom of the app you will see there's a conversation button and a camera button. I'm going to look at the camera one with you, and then Owen is going to do the conversation. And the screen recording is basically, the student has it on their phone, they get the app, they might have a handout in front of them. So if you don't want to give digital copies, they might have a handout, they might have their exam papers, or just even the textbooks. Once they have that, they can hold it over and select whatever language that they want. So you see there up on the top, oh, it'll come back in a second, but up on the top they can pick whatever language they want, down there again. And once they hold it over it, it will change to their language. You take it off, so they can go between the language of, oh, that's it in English, hold it over, oh, that's what that word means. And we can go between the two. So it's a really lovely app. A lot of people love it on holidays as well, for menus and things like that. Okay, and Owen will show you the conversation piece for holidays as well, which is lovely. So that's kind of a very quick snap of some digital tools that can help you when it comes to the written word in a classroom with an EAL student. Owen is going to take over now and look at the verbal and the visual side of things.
Great, thank
Okay,
you very much.
no problem.
Great, so as Stacey outlined there, on the written side, obviously a lot of the work we're doing with students is going to be through written communication. I'm going to do the verbal and the visual then. So we can see on the verbal here that when it comes to classroom instructions, what's happening in the classroom peer-to-peer, obviously a lot of what's happening is through verbal communication. So one of the big things that we want to try to avoid in our own practice and to be wary of is to avoid complex grammar, unnecessarily difficult words, phrases and idioms as well. So that's a little bit of that unconscious bias, that personal reflection and thinking about our own practice. That's obviously helpful when it comes to actually communicating with students in class, but it's also helpful when we're looking at the tools here. So there's a number of tools for live translation. If we're avoiding idioms, complex grammar, complex language, it's going to make the tools themselves a bit more accurate also. That make sense? Great. So you can see on the right-hand side there in the picture, there's 4 tools there. We're just going to look at 2 of them. So YouTube, you have live captions on YouTube. You can just click them on, change the language. If there's a video you're sharing with students, Google Translate, again, just show you the conversational version of that. And then with Google Slides and PowerPoint, there's excellent tools there. Now, with the we're going to show the PowerPoint one. So with the PowerPoint one, we have this Present Live. Now, it wasn't working for us before our presentation here, so we'll try it and hopefully it will. But under Slideshow, we have this Present Live button. So when we click the down arrow, we can make it so that the audience are people in our organization or anybody. So obviously in a classroom situation in your own school, it can stay as only people in your organization or your domain. But for this purposes, if it works, we'll have as anyone. Great,
Yay.
It worked, success. Okay, so the idea here, and you can give it a go now if you wish, is to scan the QR code or type in the URL, and that brings you to the slide deck itself. So you'll be able to open the slide deck, but you'll also have live captioning of what I am saying as well. So you will be able to see, as long as I avoid idioms and complex grammar and so forth, it can do a pretty good job of live captioning my communication directly in class. Then you can also, on your screen, change the language. So you can change to any language there, and it will live translate to your home language. So I'll keep talking as you figure it out on screen. Yeah. Okay, fantastic. I'm very talented. Fijian, my goodness. I didn't know I had that one in my locker. Excellent. So again, obviously, something like this relies upon a relatively quiet room. It's a certain style of teaching, but whether it be for a classroom situation where a student is presenting, that they have that opportunity to translate that live. So again, a fantastic tool that's there to help teachers, to help students in class. Great. So then back to Google Translate, we have the conversation button on the left-hand side. So this might be a peer-to-peer situation, whether it be at lunchtime or in the playground or in classroom, but students have the opportunity to communicate with one another live using the Google Translate function. So again, open the app, choose conversation in the bottom left, and then you can, once you've chosen conversation, it will automatically detect what you're speaking, but if it isn't getting it right, you can change the languages. So I have English here and Portuguese here. So I didn't attempt my Portuguese for a back-to-back or a back and forth conversation, but you have my English at the top translating to a student who maybe has Portuguese as their home language. Okay, so you have that opportunity, and it might be for students obviously as well, but parent-teacher meetings is obviously one that this can be useful for also. Okay. Great. So on the visual side then, so obviously those tools so far have kind of helped us out with the written side of things and the verbal side of things. But for a student coming in who doesn't have English as their home language, visuals can be a really useful, simple way to engage in class and not get lost, to keep up with what is happening in class minute to minute and what the instructions are without understanding the language. So we have two tools here. We have Classroom Screen and we have Canva as well. So let's show some of the ways you can use each as useful tools. And the idea here, like I said, is to make the plan for and progression of activities clear to all students. And to use those visuals effectively during activities. So it might be a stopwatch, as simple as a stopwatch, and then you're showing what activity you're moving from and to. Trying to make the visuals effective for all students in the class, so that comes back to the cultural diversity and cultural sensitivity, that students understand what each symbol means, that there's clarity around that. And that's where a whole school initiative can come in as well, that there's consistency across all classrooms for these symbols, whatever the symbols might be. So as examples, we have Classroom Screen here. So for Classroom Screen, we have 4 symbols. Okay, so it should be hopefully pretty clear what those symbols are. So we're working away, we're writing in class potentially, and I've just put the spotlight on that. So there's a shortcut for the spotlight of Shift-S, or we can click Spotlight. So if students are writing in class, they understand that whilst this is on the board, that's what they're doing. And then it might be that you are listening to the teacher or listening to one another, whatever the case might be, and you're moving through those activities. And then the group conversation is going to be the third one or the fourth one there on that list. Okay, so visuals aiding the progression through activities. And then we have, with Classroom Screen as well, we have a poll here in the bottom left. So we've made a poll here in the bottom left. We had some tech issues beforehand, so we had to remake it, and there was some complications. But this is very similar to Menti, if we're used to Menti, that students can answer that poll by going to crs.com and then clicking on one of the options there, A, B, C, or D. So we won't get to demo that because it crashed beforehand and we didn't get to set up the new one. Basically, you need an account. We didn't get to log back in. But once you've logged in once, you can set up a poll, and it'll automatically create the QR code and the code for the students to vote remotely. Okay, and then, they're the main ones around the visuals. Again, there are all of these visuals along the bottom. We have very quick and easy ones to use in terms of the clock and the timer. And we have multiple screens to keep things nice and clear as well, if we wish. Okay, so visuals to support EAL students in our classrooms. Okay, then next we have Canva. So let's go to the home page of Canva for 1 second. So if you haven't used Canva before, I'd encourage you all to give it a go. It's something that's extremely powerful in creating engaging visuals by teachers or by students, but it's a really nice one for classroom visuals, okay, whether it be on your screen or physical ones in the class. So there's 2 here that I'll highlight, but there are any number of things you can make. So from a classroom schedule to a poster to storyboarding, graphic organizers, etc., etc. I'm going to just show quickly 2 of them. So a video, what are we time-wise? Okay. So a video we have here on the left-hand side. I'll just mute this for a second. Okay, so when you press play, it's really simple. So this is a consumer example to create engaging visuals, have text on top, and then record a narration on top of that. And obviously with the tools that we have shown already today, you can subtitle that, you can use Google Translate app to translate it, and add and create visuals and written communication for students to help it become clearer and more engaging for them. So in terms of video, it's very simple to add your text on top of video. So there's our text on video, and then to add a narration, narration. So present and record. Okay, so where's my present and record? Copy. So I've already recorded, so it's not letting me record again. So same with PowerPoint, same with Canva, you can record your narration on top of any video or any presentation. Okay, so we'll go back to our classroom activity. So we have a whiteboard. So the other option when you're creating something in Canva is to create a whiteboard. So this one here. And what that allows you to do is to have an infinite whiteboard with any number of visuals on it. So if I zoom in here as an example, this is a template that I've chosen. So we have group work feedback. So it might be that group 1 feedback into this section of the visual, group 2 or group 3 in here, etc., group 3 and group 4. And then over on the right-hand side, we might have a summary of the keywords, the key ideas. And the nice thing about Canva is that can be shared as a collaborative document, so all students can feed into it, or it can be shared as a PDF at the end, so the teacher can input the information collected from the students, share the document at the end. Okay, so what's nice about the Infinite Whiteboard is that you can have any number of visuals on it. So we have a class calendar. So it might be on Monday, we're doing some individual work, we're doing group work on Tuesday. It might be that you're putting a test on the calendar. And then over on the left, we've got some graphic organizers, so a fishbone diagram in this case. Okay, so it's all these visual supports, but obviously digital visual supports. And through Canva, they can be collaborative, so you can have students feeding into that information, into that whiteboard. And you can also create it as the teacher and then share the digital version to view, or you can print and share with students. Okay, so it's making visually engaging tools or resources that can be shared easily, either digitally or physically with students. Okay, so just to wrap up, I'm definitely close to time. So if you didn't get a chance to scan, that's for the PDF. So if you scan that or use the tiny URL, there's a summary of the resources, including the Google Sheets resource there.
They can download it.
Yeah, and then you can obviously download the PDF, and then when you open the Sheets, it'll prompt you to make a copy of that. So I'll just leave that up there for a moment, and then I'll go through some of the other resources that are available. Everybody get that okay? This should be the prize for sitting at the front of the room. Everyone got it? Yeah. Great. Okay, so that's for the PDF of the summary of all the resources. And just to quickly go through the PDST post-primary AAL support YouTube channel, you'll find a lot of support at the BICS and CALP that Stacey went through at the start, some of the theory behind and some of the, I guess, other supports that you might use in your school. We've got the blended learning supports, so for blended learning pedagogies in your class, pdst.e/blended learning. And then SchoolNet that was mentioned earlier as well. Okay, so there's multiple resources there in terms of classroom activities. The PDST Technology and Education website, there's good practice videos and online courses that are useful there as well. And then lastly, we have the PDST Digital Technologies team. So there's videos there on Canva showing you how to create videos. There's ones, obviously you can see there, explaining certain aspects of PowerPoint, Teams, Immersive Reader, etc. So if you're looking for step-by-step guides for the tools we did today, as well as other useful ones for class, the PDST Digital Technologies YouTube channel is the place to go. So thank you all. I think we're a little over time, but that's us for today. So thank you, Stacey, and thank you all for your attention. Have a good rest of the day.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah.
You're on. Okay, cool. Hi, everybody. There's like a small group, so I'm not going to make this anything madder than it has to be. I said I'd talk about random stuff about teaching computer science. I mean, you don't have to pay attention to any of this, or you can pay attention to everything. But it's a little bit of history, I guess. What works, what doesn't, what failed, what is computational thinking, because that's a term that everybody uses, and like most people get it wrong, I think, for a starting point. So anyway, it's a bit of fun. Welcome, my name is Keith. I'm part of CS Inc., and my conference title is called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, for no other reason than there's a bit of fun in the title. When we come here, we always try to have a little bit of fun. We're part of a wider research group, and the CS Inc. team is one of them is here. Miriam's in the back center, and I think some of our other colleagues, Keith and Amanda, are talking next door, which is kind of a bit split up. But hey, it is what it is. So that's us. Hey. So my talk today starts off about teaching computer science and how different it is to everything else. And my talk is 15 minutes, with 15 minutes where you get to attack me. So I have a whole bit at the end where you can throw anything you want at it, because it's easy to stand up here and talk, isn't it, about like what you should teach rather than how you actually do it. So if anybody's in the room, I encourage you to try catch me out in the last 15 minutes. Otherwise, we're going to be done 15 minutes and you get to relax, I think, for the remainder of it. Okay, so let's start off. There's a lot of stuff in computer science. Forget about the content, right? There's terminology, there's this thing called computational thinking. I really want to show you something called notational machines. There's different pedagogies, and all of a sudden it gets very word heavy. So I wanted to start off with terminology. First of all, there's a lot of it in computer science. Like, not just a little, there's a lot. I mean, I would fail that everybody knows what every single one of these things were. In fact, does anybody know Richard Millwood here? You all know Richard, right? I got into a fight with him, really nice discussion at the Microbit conference about the definition of these three words. And if we can't agree on it, or we did agree at least mostly, how are you all going to agree on it? So first of all, there's a lot. Is that okay? Yeah, no. When you look nervous, I get nervous. No, I'm missing a laptop, but that's not your problem. I didn't take it, I promise. Cool. So in any case, right, there's a lot of acronyms. And computer scientists are famous for using a lot of acronyms. And it kills me, because if we can't understand them, how are you going to get kids to understand this? So first of all, don't worry, we don't know it all either. We wing it most of the time, and we make up a lot of stuff. So stick to basics at all costs, right? Sometimes it's better telling a little white lie that these things here, for example, are kind of like a function or definition, and just call it that. Don't be worried. I mean, when you get to third level, we might hammer you a little bit for definition terms, but when you're learning at the beginning, like, it's tough, right? It really is tough. So don't worry, we don't know it all either. And then I'm going to address something that's in, like, I mean, this is difficult to address because everybody uses this term, computational thinking. If I asked you all to define it, every one of you would define it differently. So let's start off with a little bit of history to it. I really like this diagram. This is from Barefit in the UK, and it kind of gives you a breakdown of what they expect to be there rather than definitions or terminology. So this is from the Computing at Schools, which is the equivalent kind of the PDSD, and I really like this diagram because it tells you things that are important to computational thinking, like creating, debugging, rather than very high-level definitions that none of us agree to. So a little bit of history, which I'm sure some of you don't know. So originally it was coined in around 1980 by a person called Seymour Papert. Does anybody know who that is? He was Deirdre Butler's PhD supervisor who gave the keynote today. Yes, it's a very small world in computer science, and Ireland really does do well. I can't curse on the camera. If you weren't here, I would. But it's amazing how much Ireland have in common with computing history. So yes, he was Deirdre Butler's PhD supervisor, as far as I'm aware. Correct me if I'm wrong, Deirdre's not here, but as far as I'm aware. And then lately, in 2006, in a thing that we follow a lot in academia, ACM, Jeanette Wing kind of brought it back to life as a thing, as computational thinking, as a term. And since then, we've all used it so much that it is embedded in every single thing that we do in computer science. Still, there's things we can learn and things that can progress from it. So after we have a little bit of computational thinking background, what are the definitions? Wow, there's a lot of them. I couldn't even agree on one. I like this one because it's Wing's one, and she's kind of like the person who brought it back to life. I really like K-12CS.org's definition, where they just have 4 bullet points wrapped around what computational thinking is. And again, it's not like words with no meaning. It's kind of like creating artifacts, but they must be computational. And I like that. Developing and using abstractions, testing and debugging. So I like this because it's short and sweet. I really like this definition. However, we get it wrong a lot. And this is something that is starting to rear its head. I don't know if anybody knows, Quentin Cutts is pretty much the leader I'm after forgetting where he's from. In Scotland, sorry. And basically, they're starting to highlight concerns that are currently happening. So in 2017, efforts to make computer science entirely about computational thinking in the absence of computers is a problem. So there's a lot of talk recently that doing computational thinking that is not directly related to computer science or computing is no benefit to us. In fact, there was a paper released recently by someone, I'm not going to remember the name, and they basically said, if you do computational thinking, which is a completely separate unplugged exercise, you are not helping them learn computing. Now, there's also really good reasons to do computational thinking. So there's loads of good challenges to get kids thinking about how computers think, but if you just do it as part of a formal curriculum like Leaving Cert Computer Science, there's not much evidence that suggests it helps. Next up, computational thinking. This is Maddie Terdier and Denning, that it's been vague. It's been difficult to teach computational thinking. Hands up who's ever seen, you don't have to put your hands up, but who has ever seen someone go, computational is the best thing in the world, and here's a cool problem, and you sit there going, I have no idea how to solve that. I have no scaffolding. I'm in trouble, and it's a big problem with it. So computational thinking has misconceptions. There's been a really cool solution recently, though. It's not published yet, because I got to be at a talk in Germany where they gave it, and it was amazing. And it was Eric Benerstein from the Netherlands, and he's developed a computational thinking process model. And it shows you how to hit all of the aspects of computational thinking in a really clear and coherent way. And I love that. When it's published, I'll be putting it on the screen at the next time around. It's really cool. So anyway, here's some good, bad, and the ugly about things that exist in computer science. And computational thinking is for sure one of these things. Now, there's other things that have got started off amazing, as good as computational thinking, and I think you all teach it, but then it's sort of again now becomes problematic because we've like, this is such a good idea, we'll all try it, and then we go, oh, there's effects to this, and this could be problematic. So the next one that I'm going to look at is called notational machines, and you've all used it. Hans Who's described a variable as a box. You have to have, right? Yeah, there's hands going up. Is it a really good idea to describe a variable as a box? I know I already gave away the ghost by saying we kind of learn these things, but it is a good idea, right, at the beginning. But then there's something we kind of forget. So I love notational machines. So notational machines is about how students build mental models of what's happening inside of a computer. Because really it's hard to tell them that there's a bit of RAM in here and there's a weird address and it's stored as zeros and ones and it pulls it back out and it multiplies things perhaps. That's a lot, even at primary school. So we've all used this idea that we make a box and we put something in the box and it's really good. What could be problematic about talking about a box? So we make a variable called length. I might have robbed this from a book. But if we take this, and this is, by the way, it's a really good way to teach. So I'm trying to set a balance here, right? But what could be a problem with calling it a box if you're teaching this? I get to dance for a few minutes while you're waiting. The problem is we can develop misconceptions if we don't be a little bit more secure. So does a box hold more than one? Can a box hold different things? Is a box big, small, infinite in length? And if so, where and when does that apply? Does it really matter when you're doing Python? Maybe not. Python hides a lot of this stuff. However, JavaScript does not. So when you move to JavaScript, all of a sudden, all the cool things you taught them might not work. So there's a danger of teaching everything in different orders and different ways that if we make a mistake, we could have knock-on effects down the line. So these could be misconceptions of what things can do. It's okay to introduce misconceptions. We do it at Junior Cert Science. The Bohr's model is a circle with dots, and everybody thinks that's the atom. And then they get to Leaving Cert and they're like, oh, wait there, this is not really the atom, it's like this. But we're telling them in a specific order. And in computer science, I'm saying this is a brilliant way to teach coding because I do it all the time, but I do it with caveats that when I teach it, I'm very aware of what's coming up next or what I'm going to teach next, and all of that exists. But I love notational machines. So there was a couple of papers on the idea of notational machines, and her name is Fräulein Hermines. She's class. Like, I mean, I think one day that she was telling me that she teaches all of first-year computer science using Excel, because she thinks that's a cool way of doing it. And they came up with the ideas of developing this idea of notational machines. So it kind of started off in 2020 as this really big working group of amazing people. If you don't know some of those names, you really need to look them up. Anyway, the idea is that, that's from me, and she is developing a memory box. So to came up with the idea of a memory box. What else can exist? We can talk about tracing variables as you do on a screen, and what you're doing is you're building up an idea of how students think about how a computer works. And if they can think about how a computer works, hopefully they'll be able to agree with it, and then tell a computer how it works. Then from here, you can do things like black boxes. We talk about this all the time in AI because AI is still just a function in a box. We give it something, we get something out, and sometimes, abstraction, we don't really care what's inside the box. Sometimes we do. And these are all things called notational machines. So the idea is building up an idea of how computers work. So this was just something I picked out because I kind of like notational machines a lot, with a caveat that I'm careful with how I use them and where I use them. And then let's talk a little bit about pedagogy. There has been nothing in computer science for years, and there's something I'm going to show you in a few minutes, only the use, modify, create. And this is kind of okay. It's like, right, I'm going to use code, it's not mine. I'm kind of going to tweak it a bit. Oh, okay, I can play with it a bit. And then finally, maybe I can build my own. And this has been out for years and years and years and years, but it wasn't so helpful. But you're all teachers, so you know of all the other pedagogies you can use, like think, pair, share, peer assessment, peer instruction. There's loads of different things you can do in your classroom already that you have the tools to equip with. So that's lots of theory. And I always stop at theory and go, this is not very helpful for you all because it's very theory-based. So I wanted to talk about how theory meets practice, and then I'm going to let you slate me and tell me how I would do something. So we're going to look at 2 areas. This is by no means all the areas, but I'm going to look at Prim and then what we call Parsons problems. So I want to show you 2 ideas of where I can help you today in computer science. So Prim is developed by Sue Sentence and Jane Waite. I'm sure you know a lot of them. They're both amazing people who love and care more about computer science than pretty much anybody in the whole planet, I would say. They're class. And their first 2 papers were in 2017 and 2019 about this idea of Prim. So it is a build upon, use, modify, create. No major difference. So it starts off with P, which I love because it stands for predict, which is called reading code. And all the time we start off by getting kids to write code. Do you learn English by writing English first? Never. It's a skill, a separate skill. We do not read code enough. I'm sorry, I'm going to stand up here and say the ugly of computer science at the minute is we do not read code enough. On day 1, we asked them to write print hello world. Do you ever show them print hello world first? Maybe, maybe not. So there's lots of problems with this. I think we never do enough of this. In fact, if I had a choice, and I'm going to try get choices, I'm going to make people read code way before they have to write code. Next up, run. This is really cool because we want them to guess the output. We're building up notational machines. We're building up the ideas of how to do it. But we never really just go run this code and see what happens. We think that's wrong. We think, why should they do it that way? I mean, this is a bit constructivist, and people might like just showing code that works on the screen. But sometimes we need to get it, like, why is it important that they run it? Because if it goes wrong, they get to test it. Every talk so far today has talked about how kids don't have enough debugging skills, fixing the problems that exist in the code, but yet we're the ones telling them that should work the first time and they have to write it from scratch without ever finding out problems. So running code is so important. My favorite bit of it all, which isn't in use modify, is investigate. Why did it go wrong? Can you figure out why it went wrong? I love this. This is my favorite part of computer science by a long shot. Debugging. Most people hate it. I love this because it's like tracing through the code, explaining it. These are, by the way, are all the definitions from Prim, right? But also, at the same time, a person in Germany called Carlson Schulz came up with what's called the box model. And the box model is class. At a macro structure, relationships, blocks, fundamental sizes, surface, execution, and purpose. And I love this. It gives you a set to make up questions. So for example, if you want to talk about relationships and purpose, choose a name for your variable or function. How does this relationship show purpose? What is the purpose of this name? If we go further, blocks, explain the purpose of a block of code. If we want to talk about execution, reordering the lines of code, Parsons problems, which I'm going to show you next. How, I'll give this slide to anybody that emails me. I'll give you the entire slide. Please do not worry. But this is class. This gives you a way to restructure how you might ask questions or develop your lesson plans. This is something I use all the time. I really love the block model. There's way more to it. I'll send you the link to his research. He's pretty much the Sue Sentence of Germany, by the way. Okay, cool. So that's the block model, and that's investigate. And then we have modify, which is use, modify, create, right? So it's back to the same thing. It's a really important factor. And of course, make, which is create. It's the same principle. So what Sue and Jane did was basically take 1 and split it into 3. So instead of using, they said, predict it, run it, and investigate it, which is using technically, but they just specified the differences for it. Because Sue works for King's College London, then she went to Raspberry Pi, now she's in Cambridge. They developed loads of sheets called primportal.com, and there's loads of activities that describe how you would work with predict, read, investigate, make, and modify if you're stuck for a couple of activities. And I thought this was a good idea to give you some hands-on stuff that you can actually download and start using tomorrow. And I really like this. So there's all, I was going to go through them, but I told you I want you to slate me, which is going to come up in a little bit. And then we have Parsons problems. Has anybody used Parsons problems? Nobody. Oh, this is going to be fun. I love Parsons problems. I use them for assessment. I use them for everything, actually, right? So let's have a look at it. Welcome to Parsons problems. It doesn't matter if you do Scratch. It doesn't matter if you do Python. It doesn't matter if you do JavaScript. Parsons problems are based around reading and predicting and modifying code, which is, again, where I think we should be starting for. And the idea was developed by Dales Parsons, and only last year, A person called Barbara Erickson in a working group did tons of work on Parsons problems because they work at third level so well and they're not that well known at second level. What is Parsons problems? It looks like a bit of a jumbled up of code. Well, here's an example, a live example. You're given all of the blocks you need plus some additional blocks that are called distractors, wrong blocks, and you have to order them to get the correct solution. No writing, it's not block programming. It can still be done with Python, and I'm going to have some examples here, and it gives you highlights that you got 1 or 2 blocks wrong. You can print them and use them as a test and put A, B, C, D, E, F, reorder, so kids do not have to write code. I love Parsons problems, and there's an IDE here where you can write your Python code, put some distractors in, and it generates live Parsons problems that the students have to do. Can't do it on like all the time, but it's a nice little cool way of teaching code without having students to remember. Like how often is 80% of their so we call this cognitive load in programming. We give them too much of it. We give them, you have to write the code, you have to debug it, you have to do this all in one exercise. Give them a small task in Parsons problems. Really get to the bottom of where it's right or wrong. The distractors are class, but I'll show you how to add them in a few minutes. So this is all my worth theory meets practice. And I did say I would stop because I'm going to stop here. And I'm going to ask for participation. I had to. I'm sorry. Oh, why did my okay, so there we go. Please be nice, but let's take any topic you wish. Any programming, don't go mad and have it like 4,000 lines of code. Pick something, and we'll talk about how we'll implement Prim, how we'll build a Parson problem. This is my random request to you all. Please slate me if you want, but I am open to anything. We're going to talk about notational machines, how we break down a lesson plan. And I thought on Reddit, instead of talking to you for 30 minutes, which I think I have like 10 minutes left or so, is that right? Ish? You're all saying nothing, so I guess as long as I want then, I guess. Is there anything you want me to do? If not, I'll just write a random Python program that does whatever, and we'll try solve it in Parson problems and talk about notational machines. And yes, be kind. It says be kind. Go.
Would you, if you were just starting off like you would say, would you go straight into predicting?
Yes.
Would you not need to maybe do
Why? Kids are really smart. They'll figure out the starting lines. Can I ask you, let's do this. Here's the Parsons problems, right? I typed the code, I give it a title called Be Nice. Can you all see this, yeah? Ish. Here, I'll make it bigger here. I'm typing with a ledge in front of my laptop, so I'm sorry, right? So let's go x equals 7. I'm already doing bad stuff. X equals x plus 2. Print x, right? Hold on, wait there. X equals x plus 3. Distractor. So I'm telling it that's a wrong piece of code in my generator. Is that okay? So create puzzle. You give them the text in your own head that you want this program to create a variable, add 2 to the variable, and print it out. Who here has never programmed before, ever? Please say there's 1 or 2 people. Nobody. Have you ever programmed before? Yeah. Okay. Okay, but you get the idea. Order up the lines. You create a variable to number 7. I'm losing this one. You add 2 to it. You're telling them the text. Am I reading code now, or am I writing code? Do I understand what's really happening with x equals 7? Does it matter at this point? Are you teaching fundamental order in code? Yes. We're getting them to read. They can test it. Like if they did this, bring my code, oops. It does indentation and everything, right? Get feedback. Your program has too few code elements, as in you need more to be able to solve the problem. If I then say x equals x plus 3, and I say x equals 7, I've added the distractor rather than the correct one. Code fragments in your program are wrong or in the wrong order. This can be fixed by missing, removing, or replacing. I'm giving them feedback on the fly while doing it. Now, of course, at the same time of this, you could break out the good old-fashioned pen and paper and start introducing memory boxes. So we have we go x equals 7. We talk about some way of creating a memory box, which is called x. On the first, everything on the right is set, left is get. So in this case, I get 7 because it's just hard-coded, and I'm going to set it to x. So 7 gets placed in the memory box. So now I'm using notational machines to walk through the simplest piece of code I could have written so far. Most people will do that in 1 second and move on and expect kids to fully understand what's happening. Okay, next up. X equals x plus 2. What really happens here? Well, remember, everything on the right is get, everything on the left is set. So I need to go and get x from the box, and kids start realizing that this is much more amenable to them. So I'm going to run over and get x, so this means I replace this with 7. The computer now sees a random piece of code that is 7 plus 2 is 9. I can replace all that with 9. What's on the right is set, get, left is set. So now I replace 9 with the variable 7, And this was the way I was taught in university. Not one line of live code was written on the screen. It was all done this way. And it wasn't even called it wasn't called notational machines, it was just called this. And then we can go back and go, okay, so if this happens here, and I go back to my Parsons problem, maybe this is the incorrect one, so okay. I drag it back over, and all of a sudden, this lesson that would have been just 3 lines of code, and some students may not have got it. You can do this with if statements. It does indentation in Python. There's ones for Scratch. And now, if I get feedback, please say it worked. Hey, it worked. My point to this, all of this is that this is just, I did open it up for ideas. This is how I would start teaching. And I think we read far too often. We get students to write before they can read. This is prim. This is already done predict and investigate and technically modify a little bit. You've picked 3 boxes of it already, and then all you have to do is get them to modify this to do something else, maybe in a Python IDE, and then get them to make their own version based on something similar. Whew. I think I'm kind of done. I have a few minutes, but if you have any questions, I'd love to know them. I love this. I did call this Be Nice. Oh, by the way, you can share that link and all that. Look, these are tools, right? Isn't it irrelevant? It's the Parson problem bit that we love. Whether it's a pen and paper and slotting them around on a screen, whether it's select A, B, or C in a written test, or whether it's actually using an interactive one, it doesn't matter. You're already quiet. I'm going to just say I'm done then. Yeah.
Are the Parsons problem-solving website, do they have pre-made?
Oh, loads of them. Yes, yes. And actually, I tell you what, there's something that, so in Ireland, we're terrible at sharing assessments and sort of problems like this. In the States, they had the exact same problem. So I can't remember the name of it, but they invented a website for people to host, and it's peer-reviewed. So the stuff has to go in, and then you review it, and it gets accepted or not. And it's like 1 million resources for teaching any language. But look, there's always repositories for resources. My talk today, hopefully, was about how you might use them to teach rather than anything else. And there were just 3 or 4 different things that you may not have seen before. I guess, if anybody wants to email me, I'm going to make this big again. Like, please, 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 email me. I'll send you the presentation. It's just a link on Prezi anyway, so you can rob everything you want from it. You can use it as much as you wish. But I hope that was okay. I mean, we talked about a lot of heavy theory there, and then some stuff that we can actually do in a classroom. Sorry the code example was so basic, but it makes a point, I hope. Okay, I'm done. Thank you.